Good morning, ladies, gentlemen, and esteemed guests of the CNEHA. My name is Colleen Tamblyn, and I'm a graduate student at Memorial University of Newfoundland, here to present on a new method of community engagement and ceramic analysis I've been calling the 5 ceramic F words. This methodology was developed in tandem with and for the community of Placentia to increase public understanding of what ceramic analysis is and what its goals are. At some point along the way, I also realized that this has the potential to become an interesting statistical analysis tool, if I can get it to work. In participating in a month of community outreach this past July, I learned firsthand that there's a very delicate balance to be struck between academia and the communities we serve when we do archaeology. Less like walking on a tightrope, which usually comes with training and a safety net, I found myself that striking the balance was more like walking on a wrought iron fence, with the balusters waiting to take me out should I fall. I thought by articulating my research objectives to the community when they first came in to see me, I would be conveying my message appropriately. After all, I was in Placentia to study how the ceramic assemblage at Fort Louis varied during the French period of occupation, which would allow me to document changes in provisioning and trade networks and changes in socioeconomic status over time. I also wanted to initiate a discussion with the community of Placentia in order to cultivate a symbiotic learning environment. Now, whether it was the academic jargon, my uncanny ability to speak quickly when I'm nervous, or perhaps a combination of the two, I'm sad to say that I lost most people within the first dozen words. I even had one of my later visitors make the remark that their eyes must have tin glazed over. So I changed tactics and opened with a brief history of the fort. While the land was before used by the French and by the Basque to dry their cod catch on the flat cobbled beaches, Placentia, then Plaisance, was attacked from behind by the English in 1690. It is after this attack that we begin to see the first iterations of the need for additional fortification in Placentia Harbor. Fort Louis would be the second of what was eventually 7 French points of fortification in Placentia Harbor, and always maintained the largest amount of weaponry. In 1691, the fort begins construction under the supervision of Jacques Lhermitte, and not a moment too soon, because in 1692 the Battle of Plaisance rages, with the French able to repel an attempted English blockade with resounding success and significantly less available firepower than their English counterparts. By 1694, the fort is decreed great and finished, and is accompanied by up to 28 cannons on gun platforms that pointed into and out of the harbor. Only 2 years later, in 1696, the fort is said to be in a dismal state, the palisade had rotted, and attempts are being made to rebuild the fort in stone. Dysentery ravages the colony of Plaisance in 1704, and the effects of it are long-reaching, with the colonists realizing that all it would take would be one bad season for their entire colony to fail. By 1709, rebuilding had come to a standstill. The project was apparently plagued by laziness and money laundering, and the colony at this point was fully involved in Queen Anne's War and had to divert their attention to the likes of d'Iberville, who launched his campaign against the English in Newfoundland from their shores. By 1713, the colony, the forts, and all their available resources were ceded to the English by the Treaty of Utrecht, and the land the fort was on stood unused in a military sense until 1740, when the English destroyed the fort and raised the land up by a meter to build what they called the new fort in its place. The history lesson and the touch table of artifacts seemed to have people's attention. Now, the fence did not loom quite so large as I continued to walk on its perilous points. Informed and engaged questions began to arise from the community. Why a bunch of old pots? Well, I said, the evolution of ceramic is highly studied, and I'd go so far as to compare it to the evolution of the modern smartphone. There's always the drive to make something better, prettier, and cheaper. What does an archaeologist consider about the pots? Well, I said, everything. I look at fabric inclusions, decoration on both the inside and the outside of the vessel, how far the vessel had to come to end up in Placentia, the shape of the vessel, and what that shape could have been used for. How are you doing your analysis, though? And like that, those pointy balusters of the wrought iron fence were very close to all my squishy bits. I told them what I was looking at, and all I had to fall back on was the academic jargon that I'd been trained in. What I wanted to do was a statistical analysis based on archaeological theories of behavioral archaeology, consumption theory, and the socioeconomic theories about patterns of conspicuous consumption. I was going to create and analyze interconnected webs of wealth expression and socioeconomic change. I thought that this tactic with the history lesson and the touch table had been working, but my feet began to slip, and I prepared to do my absolute best to catch myself before I fell off the fence. What becomes the 5 ceramic F words started only as one F word, but I was encouraged to develop my methodology beyond the strictly expletive that I really wanted to use. I split ceramic analysis into 5 easy to manage attributes. Form, what did the complete vessel look like? From, where did the ceramic vessel come from? Function, what was the ceramic vessel's intended purpose? Fragility, how easy would this vessel have been to break? And faience, how is this vessel decorated? Altogether, these 5 categories could come together to inform patterns that could aid in interpreting cost or perceived cost. By using cost as an aspect of influence on an object's value, we could map the socioeconomic changes across the site, not just vertically in events, but horizontally across the site. The public loved it. My supervisors loved it. I had succeeded. I built a framework for community engagement that seemed to work. I'd made ceramic analysis accessible to the public. They understood it. I should mention that I'm not the first to identify these attributes, and I have seen them in the work of several scholars. Naomi S. Mueller's mechanical and thermal properties of ceramic influence the attributes form, fragility, and function. Quim Diestermatt's relational approaches to organization of pottery production influence the attributes from, function, and faience. Valentin Rouge's laboratoire approach to ceramic analysis influenced function, form, and from. And lastly, Kent D. Fowler's concept of ceramic ethnography influenced from, form, and function. Given the analytical potential of the 5 Fs, I wondered if I could push the framework further. Could the F words become something other than an engagement tool? Could I use the 5 F words to do statistical analysis? Could I do something basic with the numbers that would allow the community to follow along as I did more complicated statistical analysis? What I did know was that Placentia was hungry for archaeological advancement. Digging had stopped 10 years ago, and while some basic analysis had been done with their ceramic vessels, that too was finished almost more than 10 years ago. The community wanted to know not just how I planned to do ceramic analysis, but how that analysis could form the webs of socioeconomic change I was hoping to document. I had to find a simple, clear, cognitive method to document the differences in events across the site while keeping further statistical analysis a possibility. I personally know a lot of people who got into archaeology because they were afraid of math, so I wondered if I could develop a statistical foundation as well that could help archaeologists by keeping the math simple and meaningful. Discriminant function plots, principal component analysis, biplots, chi-squares, and p-values, all that could come later. What I needed to focus on now was making the math as accessible as possible to rapidly classify Fort Louis events. So I came up with what I call event-specific value totals. To begin, we ascribe value on a scale of 1 to however many ceramica types are available across the assemblage for all 5 F words. These values are assigned relationally in comparison to Chinese hard-faced porcelain. According to the F words, porcelain would have been the epitome of ceramic technology in a post-medieval North American colonial assemblage. The forms it takes vary from large and decorative to absolutely minuscule. They come from very far away, and they hold exclusively singular functions. Their firing temperatures are high, which makes them very fragile, and they're finely decorated in hand-painted indigo pigment. Therefore, the value of Chinese hard-paste porcelain will always be the highest, and utilitarian coarse earthenware containers will be of the lowest value. Inside events, values are assigned with regard to type present within the assemblage for reasons I discuss later. Event-specific value totals are simply an average, adding up the value per type, or VPT, assigned to form, from, function, fragility, and faience, and then dividing by the number of available ceramic types within the assemblage. For example, here we have 2 mock assemblages. The first contains Westerwald, Saintonge, tin glazed earthenware, and Iberian, and the second contains just Saintonge and tin glaze. The reason that the numbers change is because in each assemblage we only have a limited number of ascribed types. An assemblage with only 2 types can only have a maximum value of 2. Note that relationality between the numbers does not change even if the numbers themselves do. Saintonge will always rank lower than tin glazed earthenware in form, function, fragility, and faience VPTs because tin glaze more closely resembles porcelain than Saintonge does. With the fact that value has to be ascribed, I opened the door for this process to be inherently biased based on my own personal preferences. Comparison to porcelain will work, but it may eliminate a portion of the population that did not have the ability to participate socioeconomically in patterns of conspicuous consumption. It would be incredibly unfair to eliminate this portion of the population. This is something I'm working on addressing currently. Processes of automation of ascribing value do exist, and I could assign values more accurately once those values were coded for within these programs. R can do this. In theory, Excel could do this, and there must be other programs that exist that can do this for me. I know that as it is, the process is biased, but it does work. Let me show you. To begin, I've selected an event from my assemblage from Fort Louis, event 276, which at the time of writing had 81 ceramic artifacts cataloged within it. Values are assigned on a scale from 1 to 11, because in this assemblage there's only 11 types. And all values are assigned in relationality to Chinese hard-paste porcelain, with tablewares tending to trend higher than utilitarian wares like Iberian and Normandy. This was expected due to the limited function of tableware. Assigning numbers requires extremely intimate knowledge of each ceramic type, which I am still developing and would happily take consultation from other experts in the field. And as such, numbers are ascribed are subject to rapid change. Once VPTs are assigned, we add all the VPTs together to get the type value total, or TVT. So addition is done horizontally across tables. So to get Westerwald's type value total, we add up the form value per total, the from value per total, the function value per total, the fragility value per total, and the faience value per total to get it. This gives us a total of 39. We do this for every type all the way down. The math is designed to be easy. For clarity, I've included a minimum, median, and maximum value total. Remember the median value total, 27.5. This number is important later. To get our event-specific value totals, we add together all the typology value totals and divide by the number of available ceramic types across the assemblage. In this particular case, we add up the results of the final column in the table and then divide by 11, which leaves us with an event-specific value total of 30.09. For this particular assemblage, the median event value total is 27.5. This makes event 276 above average, which can be indicative of upticks in socioeconomic factors, including better export and more regular import. This could have encouraged further patterns of conspicuous consumption and a discard pattern that reflects the values ascribed to wealthier settlements, as discussed in behavioral archaeology and consumption theory. If we cross-reference this historically, we can see that this event was likely laid down between the years of 1694 and 1701, when Plaisance was flourishing economically. Or it's deposited after Plaisance and Fort Louis are ceded to the English. Due to event 276's place in the Harris matrix, I think it far more likely that it is among the first of the English depositions. To get a clearer picture of the rest of the assemblage in comparison in terms of being above or below average, event-specific value totals would have to be calculated for more than 330 events. Everything from VPTs to TVTs to event-specific value totals would change as we considered the entire assemblage rather than just one event. Why not proportion was a big question I had to wrestle with. Proportionality could certainly be considered, especially when dealing with smaller, less complete assemblages. Currently, it adds additional steps and some complex multiplication of fractions to what is a brand new methodology. Using absence-presence allows me to address patterns across the site where higher value items show up and how these objects can be more indicative of more prosperous or less prosperous years. If the peoples of Plaisance could engage in patterns of conspicuous consumption, they will also discard with less concern for what they are discarding. Rapidly, this becomes less about math and less about statistics, and more an exercise in historical psychology. In a project that focuses on accessibility of data, we account for and teach to the lowest common denominator. Anybody can do an average, and that's all that this is comparing two averages. There will be a time for p-values and metadata. I wanted to see if my methodology worked. This is but a first step, an experiment into seeing how far the F-words can be pushed. Additional, more traditional analysis will have to be done in order to back up the preliminary analysis that this method can do. In conclusion, the F-words offer two things. Firstly, the opportunity to engage with the public in a way that they are proved to understand and that they help to shape. Secondly, by pushing this method of engagement and assigning values within attributes, I developed a simple analytical methodology that seems to work. Having tested it on about 5 events so far, it really wants to work. Now I have to fine-tune to address biases and automate relationality across different ceramic types and across the entire site. With a little work and programming, I could further develop the methodology so that it can work at other sites and maybe even with other artifact types. Before I open up to questions, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm funded by the Institute of Social and Economic Research and the J.R. Smallwood Foundation. My supervisors are Dr. Catherine Lazier and Dr. Barry Galton, to whom I'm exceptionally grateful for their hard work and patience. I also extend special thanks to the Placentia Area Historical Society and the Placentia Area Archaeological Committee and the community of Placentia in general, who opened their town, their records, and their minds to me. Thank you for listening.